Imagine, if you will, a silence so complete that it swallows time itself. Deep within the shattered remains of a fortress monastery, buried beneath 6,000 years of accumulated debris, forgotten battles, and the slow geological shifts of a dying world, something waits. Not dead, but dreaming. Not gone, but dwelling in a darkness so absolute that centuries pass like seconds, and millennia compress into the space between heartbeats that no longer truly beat. This is the fate of the Dreadnought, that most tragic and terrible of the Imperium's war machines. Somewhere on this forgotten battlefield, entombed within layers of adamantium and ceramite, a warrior sleeps. 6,750 years have passed since the stasis systems hummed to life, since the last dregs of consciousness faded into the void of suspended animation. The fortress monastery that once housed this ancient has long since fallen to ruin. The chapter that revered him has either been destroyed, scattered to the far corners of the galaxy, or evolved so far beyond recognition that they would be strangers to the warrior who once walked among their founding fathers. The planet itself bears scars of countless conflicts. Orbital bombardments have reshaped continents. Forests have risen and fallen to ash dozens of times over. Civilizations have sprouted like weeds in the ruins, only to be swept away by the next wave of war that washes across this cursed sphere of rock and regret. Through it all, the Dreadnought remains, sealed in its tomb of metal and stone, neither alive nor dead, caught in that peculiar half-existence that defines the fate of those deemed too valuable to die, yet too broken to truly live. The sarcophagus, that coffin within a coffin that houses what remains of the warrior's mortal form, continues its tireless work. Amniotic fluids circulate, preserving flesh that should have rotted to dust millennia ago. Neural interfaces maintain their connection to a brain that dreams, if indeed, what passes through that ancient consciousness can be called dreams at all. Some say the sleeping ancients experience visions of battles fought 10,000 years past. Others whisper that they dwell in absolute nothingness, a void so complete that awakening comes as a violent shock, a sudden terrible awareness after an eternity of absence. But the galaxy, as it always does, continues to turn. Wars rage across 1,000,000 worlds, empires rise and crumble, and eventually, inevitably, something finds what was meant to remain lost. The Orks arrive not with strategy or planning, but with the chaotic enthusiasm that defines their entire species. They do not invade this world because of its strategic value or mineral wealth. They come because they saw ships passing nearby and decided that looked like a good place for a fight. They crash land their ramshackle vessels across the planet's surface with all the grace of meteors, and immediately begin doing what Orks do best: fighting, looting, and building increasingly ridiculous war machines from whatever scrap they can scavenge. It's a younger Ork, what the Greenskins call a boy, who first stumbles upon the entrance to what was once a chapter's hall of heroes. He's searching for anything shiny, anything that might earn him favor with the local war boss, or trade for better weapons from the clan's mech boys. The chamber he discovers is vast, its ceiling lost to shadows despite the harsh electric lighting his fellow Orks have rigged throughout their expanding scrap warren. And there, among toppled statues and broken monuments to heroes whose names have been forgotten by all but the most ancient imperial archives, he finds something that even his limited Orkish sensibilities recognize as valuable. The Dreadnought stands silent in the gloom, covered in the dust of ages. To human eyes it would appear as a monument to tragedy, a testament to duty carried beyond the point of endurance. But to an Ork, it looks like the best loot he's ever seen. What happens next will determine not just the fate of this ancient warrior, but potentially the course of events across an entire sector of space. The discovery has been made, the Orks have found their prize, and deep within layers of adamantium and ancient technology, after 6,750 years of darkness, something begins to stir. Understanding Dreadnoughts, Living Tombs of War. To understand what the Orks have discovered, we must first comprehend the nature of the Dreadnought itself. These walking war machines are among the most tragic creations in a galaxy defined by endless tragedy. They represent the Imperium's answer to an impossible question. What do you do with a warrior too broken to fight, yet too valuable to let die? A space marine is already a being far removed from baseline humanity. Created through arcane genetic engineering and brutal surgical augmentation, each Astartes represents a tremendous investment of resources, time, and irreplaceable genetic material harvested from their chapter's Primarch thousands of years ago. But even these superhuman warriors are not truly immortal. They can fall in battle. They can be broken beyond even the considerable abilities of their chapter's apothecaries to heal. When a space marine suffers injuries so catastrophic that his body can no longer sustain life, when limbs have been torn away and organs pulped beyond recognition, when only a spark of consciousness remains in a shattered shell of flesh, the chapter faces a choice. They can grant him the Emperor's peace, allowing a decorated warrior to die with honor and have his gene seed harvested for the next generation. Or, if that warrior's experience and wisdom are deemed too precious to lose, they can inter him within a dreadnought. The process is as much a medical horror as a mechanical marvel. What remains of the space marine, often little more than a torso, partial limbs, and the crucial organs including the brain, is suspended in a sarcophagus filled with amniotic fluids. This armored coffin becomes his new body, his entire world. Neural connections are hardwired directly into his brain and nervous system, creating an interface so complete that the Dreadnought's weapons and limbs become extensions of his own will. The Dreadnought chassis itself is a masterwork of Imperial engineering, standing between 3 and 5 meters tall, depending on the pattern. These bipedal war machines marry the firepower of a main battle tank with the tactical flexibility of an infantry unit. They bristle with weapons, assault cannons that can shred heavy armor with streams of mass-reactive shells, power fists capable of crushing ferrocrete bunkers, missile launchers, plasma weapons, and an array of other armaments limited only by the chapter's armory and the ingenuity of their tech marines. The armor is layered adamantium and ceramite, the same materials used in starship hulls and fortress walls. A dreadnought can wade through fire that would reduce ordinary soldiers to ash. They can advance through artillery barrages that would crater battlefields. Only the most dedicated anti-armor weaponry or massed fire from multiple heavy weapons can reliably bring one down, and even then, the dreadnought will typically remain combat effective until its sarcophagus, the true heart of the machine, is breached. But the technology that makes a dreadnought function goes far deeper than mere armor and weapons. The neural interface is so sophisticated that the pilot experiences the machine as his own body. When the dreadnought's sensors detect movement, the pilot sees it as clearly as if with his own eyes, often more so given the advanced targeting systems integrated into the chassis. When the dreadnought walks, the pilot feels each ponderous step as naturally as he once felt his own legs striking the ground. This integration, however, comes at a terrible cost. Extended connection to a machine of such complexity places immense strain on the human mind, even one enhanced by space marine augmentations. The pilot experiences sensory confusion, dyschronometria, the inability to accurately perceive the passage of time, and gradually accumulating neural degradation. Over years and decades, the pilot's memories begin to fade. Details blur. Faces become indistinct. Eventually, ancient dreadnoughts can barely remember their lives before internment, their identities reduced to fragments of who they once were. To preserve what remains of their sanity, and to conserve the irreplaceable technology of the dreadnought itself, chapters keep their sleeping ancients in stasis when they're not needed for battle. Sealed in sacred vaults within the fortress monastery, the dreadnoughts sleep away the centuries, awakening only when the chapter faces its greatest threats, or when the wisdom of their experience is required for crucial decisions. the oldest dreadnoughts in Imperial service, have histories that span millennia. Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves, the most ancient of all, fought beside the Emperor himself during the Great Crusade more than 10,000 years ago. He has witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations. He has seen brothers die and chapters destroyed. He remembers a time before the Imperium descended into its current state of desperate, grinding survival. And every time he awakens from stasis, he must confront the reality that he has become more machine than man, more weapon than warrior, a relic of an age that will never return. This is the nature of what the Orks have found. Not merely a weapon, but a tomb containing a consciousness that has existed for nearly 7,000 years. This particular dreadnought could have been interred during the Age of Apostasy, when the Imperium tore itself apart in religious civil war. The warrior within might have fought in campaigns long forgotten by Imperial record keepers, on worlds that have since been consumed by warp storms or rendered lifeless by exterminators. His chapter could be dust and ashes, their name erased from history. Or they could still exist, scattered across the galaxy, having long ago given up their ancient brother for lost. The technology that keeps him suspended in stasis is ancient beyond measure. The patterns used to construct dreadnoughts have been partially lost to the Imperium, with each remaining chassis treated as a precious relic. The knowledge of how to build new ones exists primarily in the most sacred vaults of Mars, and even there, the tech priests often rely on incomplete schematics and half-remembered rituals rather than true understanding. And now, this ancient artifact, this walking tomb containing a warrior from an age of legends, sits in the darkness, waiting for tech priests who will never come, waiting for chapter serfs to perform the sacred rituals of awakening, waiting for the call to battle that should signal another brief emergence from the darkness. But instead of tech priests and sacred rites, instead of the familiar protocols that should precede awakening, there are Orks. And Orks don't follow protocols. They don't perform sacred rites. They bash things until they work, or until they break spectacularly, and either outcome is considered equally entertaining. The Greenskin Menace, Ork Psychology and Culture. To understand what happens when Orks encounter an ancient dreadnought, we must first comprehend the fundamentally alien nature of Ork psychology and culture. These are not merely savage humanoids with primitive technology. They are an entirely different form of life, engineered in ages past as weapons of war by a long-dead civilization, and their relationship with technology, violence, and reality itself operates on principles that would drive human observers to madness. Orks are fungal organisms, a fact that many Imperial citizens find difficult to accept. They reproduce through spores released at death or during periods of rapid growth. And these spores don't just create more Orks. A single Ork generates an entire ecosystem, smaller Gretchen to serve as laborers and cannon fodder, even tinier snotlings to tend the fungal farms, ambulatory attack squigs that serve as everything from weapons to food, and specialized Orkoid subspecies that fulfill particular roles in their ramshackle society. But the truly alien aspect of Ork biology isn't their fungal nature or their remarkable resilience. It's the fact that they possess a latent psychic field that warps reality to match their collective expectations. This phenomenon, poorly understood even by the Imperium's greatest minds, means that Ork technology functions primarily because Orks believe it should function. An Ork vehicle might be welded together from scrap metal, held together with little more than rust and wishful thinking, powered by an engine that violates every principle of thermodynamics, and painted red because everyone knows red makes things go faster. And it works. It shouldn't work. By every law of physics and engineering, it should collapse into a pile of scrap the moment anyone tries to start it. But because enough Orks believe it will work, their collective psychic field subtly adjusts reality to make it so. This doesn't mean Ork technology is pure fiction. There are actual mechanics involved, genuine engineering principles buried beneath the apparent madness. A clever Ork mech boy possesses an instinctive understanding of machinery that rivals or exceeds that of many Imperial tech priests. But the tolerance for imperfection, the ability to make machines function despite missing crucial components or being assembled backwards, stems from that unconscious psychic influence. Ork society, such as it is, operates on brutally simple principles. The biggest, strongest Ork leads. Anyone who disagrees can challenge for leadership, and challenges are settled through immediate, violent confrontation. An Ork who proves himself in battle, who accumulates the best loot, who demonstrates the kind of cunning brutality or brutal cunning that earns respect, can rise from a lowly boy to a mighty war boss commanding thousands of greenskins. This might seem like simple might makes right tribalism, and in many ways it is. But there's a surprising sophistication beneath the surface. Ork warbands develop specialized roles. Some clans, like the Bad Moons, focus on accumulating wealth and fielding the best armed warriors. Others, like the Goths, pride themselves on pure fighting prowess. The Death Skulls are legendary looters, believing that blue is lucky and painting everything they can find in garish azure. The Blood Axes have actually learned tactics from studying human opponents, though other Orks view them with suspicion for being too sneaky. Within these broader clan structures, individual Orks find their niches. Mech boys emerge with an innate talent for building and repairing machines. Pain boys develop a crude but surprisingly effective understanding of Ork biology and cybernetic augmentation. Weird boys channel the ambient psychic energy of their fellow greenskins, though the experience often drives them to crazed violence as energy builds in their skulls. But underlying all of this social structure, all the clan rivalries and individual specializations, is a single unifying drive: the need for violence. Orks are literally engineered for war. They grow larger and stronger the more they fight. They experience combat not as a terrifying necessity, but as the purest form of joy. A good fight is better than food, better than sleep, better than anything else existence has to offer. This creates a species locked in a permanent cycle of expansion and conflict. Orks fight anyone they encounter, including other Orks when no other enemies are available. When enough Orks gather in one place, their collective psychic field intensifies, calling more greenskins from across the system, or even beyond. This creates what Imperial strategists call a green tide, an ever-growing wave of Orks that sweeps across worlds, consuming everything in its path until finally destroyed by overwhelming force or collapsing under its own internal feuds once the external enemies are exhausted. The truly terrifying aspect of Orks isn't their individual strength or their crude but effective technology. It's their numbers and persistence. Kill an Ork warband and you've temporarily solved your Ork problem. But the spores they released before dying will germinate over the following months and years. Those spores will grow into a new generation of Orks who will eventually coalesce into new warbands. The only way to truly cleanse a world of Ork infestation is through complete, systematic purging, often requiring decades of constant vigilance and exterminatus-level cleansing to ensure every last spore has been destroyed. An Ork's relationship with technology reflects all of these characteristics. They don't study machines through careful analysis and experimentation. They don't record knowledge in technical manuals or pass it down through structured education. Instead, mech boys simply know how to build things, an instinctive understanding that emerges as they mature. This knowledge is part of their genetic memory, remnants of programming installed by their long-dead creators. But Orks also possess an obsessive fascination with looting. They steal everything: weapons, vehicles, armor, tools, building materials, and especially anything that looks impressive or makes interesting noises. A truly successful war boss will have accumulated a hodgepodge collection of looted Imperial tanks, scavenged Eldar technology, captured Tau battlesuits, and chaos artifacts that any sane being would never touch. The act of looting serves multiple purposes in Orc society. It provides practical resources that even Orc ingenuity requires. But more importantly, it's a visible demonstration of success. An Orc wearing looted Space Marine power armor modified to fit his massive frame, carrying a weapon stripped from a defeated enemy, riding in a captured tank welded full of additional guns and painted in garish Orc colors, is advertising his victories to every other greenskin who sees him. And when an Orc mechboy gets his hands on sophisticated enemy technology, the results can be spectacular. They might understand nothing of the principles that make it function, but they can often make it work anyway, either through brute force modifications or through the subtle influence of their psychic field, making up for their technical shortcomings. The result might bear little resemblance to the original. It will certainly be louder, probably more dangerous to the operator, definitely covered in unnecessary spikes and painted in eye-watering colors. But it will work, after a fashion. This is the species that has discovered the ancient Dreadnought. Not thoughtful archaeologists careful to preserve priceless artifacts. Not tech priests who would recognize the sacred nature of the machine and treat it with appropriate reverence. But Orcs, greenskins who see everything in terms of, can I hit someone with it? And, can I bolt more guns onto it? Orc looting behavior, more than simple theft. The Orc relationship with looting transcends mere acquisitiveness. It's woven into the fundamental fabric of their culture, their biology, and their bizarre relationship with reality itself. To understand what happens when Orcs encounter an ancient Dreadnought, we must first understand the sophisticated complexity hidden beneath their apparently simple brutality. When an Orc sees a piece of technology, several calculations occur simultaneously in his mind, though he would never describe the process in such intellectual terms. First, is it shiny enough to be worth the effort? Orcs are drawn to visible markers of quality, gleaming metal, intricate mechanisms, anything that hums or glows or makes impressive noises. An ancient Dreadnought, even covered in millennia of dust, possesses all these qualities in abundance. Second, how difficult will it be to acquire? Orcs respect strength and cunning, so something heavily guarded or difficult to reach automatically becomes more valuable. The challenge adds to the prestige. An Orc who manages to loot something from a well-defended position or who outwits guards through unusual cunning gains more status than one who simply picks up abandoned equipment. In this case, the Dreadnought sits unguarded in forgotten ruins, but its sheer mass and the obvious complexity of its systems suggest it won't be easily claimed. Third, and most importantly, what can be done with it? Orcs are compulsively practical in their own chaotic way. Every piece of loot must have a purpose, even if that purpose is simply, looks impressive on my vehicle, or makes a satisfying noise when I bash enemies with it. The best loot serves multiple purposes: practical utility, status display, and the pure satisfaction of having taken something from someone else. The entire Death Skull clan has built their identity around being the best looters in Orc society. They've elevated scavenging to an art form, developing an almost supernatural ability to find the best salvage on any battlefield. Other Orcs might mock them for being too focused on gathering rather than fighting, but those same Orcs will trade good teeth for access to Death Skull loot piles when they need specific equipment or materials. Death Skulls paint everything blue because they believe blue is lucky. And because enough of them believe it, because their collective psychic field reinforces this conviction across thousands of greenskins, blue actually does become lucky for them. They'll survive shots that should have killed them, find loot in unlikely places, have enemy weapons jam at crucial moments. Reality bends slightly in their favor, not through any conscious manipulation, but through the unconscious psychic phenomenon that makes all Ork technology work. But looting isn't just about taking things, it's about transformation. An Ork who loots a human lasgun doesn't simply carry it and use it as designed. He takes it to a mech boy who modifies it, adding extra power cells, reinforcing the housing so it can be used as a club, covering it in Orkish glyphs and clan symbols, possibly even combining it with parts from other weapons to create something entirely new. The lasgun ceases to be Imperial technology and becomes Ork technology, integrated into their ramshackle arsenal. This transformation serves both practical and cultural purposes. Practically, Ork modifications often do improve weapons for their specific needs. They make things louder, more visible, more dramatic, all qualities that matter in Ork combat, where psychological impact and the collective psychic field's reinforcement of expectations play crucial roles. Culturally, the modification marks the item as owned, claimed, Orky. It's no longer enemy equipment being used by necessity. It's a trophy, a demonstration of conquest. The process becomes even more interesting with complex technology. When Orks loot vehicles, the transformation can be spectacular. An Imperial Lehman Russ battle tank might end up with additional armor plates welded haphazardly across its hull, a new turret sporting 3 times the original number of weapons, garish war paint covering every surface, and modifications to the engine that make it louder and faster at the cost of reliability and safety. The tank barely resembles its original form, but it works, often better than it should, given the apparent chaos of the modifications. Some of the most impressive examples of Ork looting involve technology they couldn't possibly understand. There are documented cases of Orks capturing Tau battlesuits and somehow making them work despite having no knowledge of Tau engineering principles. Eldar technology, which relies heavily on psychic interfaces and materials that exist partially outside normal space-time, should be completely incompatible with Ork use. Yet Orks have been observed wielding Eldar weapons, piloting Eldar vehicles, even incorporating Wraithbone components into their own crude constructions. The explanation lies in that unconscious psychic field. An Ork doesn't need to understand how a piece of technology works. He just needs to believe it will work, surround himself with enough other Orks who share that belief, and bash it until it starts doing something useful. The psychic field fills in the gaps, makes the impossible function, turns what should be non-functional scrap into actual weapons and tools. But this same tendency can lead to spectacular failures. Ork technology is notoriously unreliable by anyone else's standards. Weapons jam, explode, or simply fall apart mid-battle. Vehicles break down, catch fire, or suffer catastrophic mechanical failures at the worst possible moments. The Orks themselves seem unbothered by this. A weapon that explodes spectacularly is almost as entertaining as one that kills enemies effectively. A vehicle that crashes is funny, as long as you're not the one driving it. Failure is just another form of excitement in Ork culture. This creates interesting dynamics when multiple Orks want the same piece of loot. Without a clear hierarchy of who saw it first or who has the right to claim it, disputes are settled through immediate violence. 2 Orks will fight over a shiny piece of scrap metal with the same enthusiasm they'd bring to a battle against deadly enemies. The winner claims the loot, and the loser either slinks away or escalates to a larger conflict, depending on relative status and available backup. Larger pieces of loot, like vehicles or particularly impressive weapons, might go directly to the war boss or to favored nobs who lead squads and command respect. Smaller Orks know better than to try claiming something that a larger, stronger greenskin wants. The unofficial rule is simple. You can keep what you can hold on to. If a bigger Ork takes it from you, it was never really yours to begin with. This brings us to the crucial question. What happens when Orks encounter something like a Dreadnought? It's obviously valuable, a massive war machine that even Orks can recognize as powerful. It's clearly complex, covered in weapons and armored in materials that their crude tools might struggle to penetrate. It's sitting there unguarded, waiting to be claimed. Every orc who sees it will want it, or at least want to know what's inside it. The smartest response would be to call for a mech boy, someone with the technical knowledge to properly assess and potentially activate the machine. But orcs aren't patient, and they're not always smart in the conventional sense. The first orc to find it might try to claim it immediately, bashing at panels and pulling at cables to see what happens. Others will arrive, drawn by the commotion, and suddenly you have a dozen greenskins all trying to figure out how to open this massive metal coffin to see what treasures it might contain. And somewhere deep inside that coffin, buried beneath layers of armor and ancient technology, a warrior sleeps. A warrior who has rested undisturbed for nearly 7,000 years. A warrior whose last waking moments were likely battle against enemies that orcs would recognize as worthy opponents. A warrior whose Dreadnought chassis is programmed to respond to threat stimuli even while the pilot remains in stasis. The orcs, in their enthusiasm to claim this prize, might not realize they're about to wake something that even their legendary resilience and numbers might not be enough to handle. The discovery. When worlds collide, the moment of discovery is rarely dramatic in the way Imperial propaganda might depict it. There are no ominous orchestral swells, no dramatic lighting effects revealing the ancient war machine in all its terrible glory. Instead, there's a young orc named Grisnak who's separated from his mob while searching for scrap in the collapsed sublevels of what was once a fortress monastery. Grisnak is, by orc standards, somewhat clever. He's survived 3 years of near-constant warfare, which is relatively impressive for a boy who started out as one of hundreds in a massive mob. He's learned to recognize valuable scrap versus worthless debris, though his definition of valuable might seem arbitrary to other species. Shiny is good. Anything with visible weapons is better. Anything that makes noise or has moving parts is best of all. The room he stumbles into was clearly important once. Even thousands of years of neglect can't completely erase the signs of significance. The floor, where it's visible beneath accumulated debris, shows intricate mosaics now mostly obscured by dust and rubble. The walls bear the remnants of murals depicting space marines in battle, though the images have faded to barely recognizable shapes. Broken statues lie toppled across the chamber, their features eroded beyond identification. And there, at the chamber's far end, partially buried in collapsed ceiling sections and surrounded by the corroded remains of what might have been ceremonial braziers or incense burners, stands the Dreadnought. Grisnak's first reaction is pure acquisitive joy. This is the best loot he's ever seen. It's massive, easily 3 times his height, and broader than 4 orcs standing shoulder to shoulder. It's covered in armor plating that, even beneath the dust and oxidation of millennia, still hints at the quality of its construction. There are weapons visible, what might be an assault cannon on one arm, some kind of power fist on the other, possibly missile launchers on the shoulders, though it's hard to tell with so much debris partially obscuring the machine. He approaches cautiously, not out of respect for what he's found, but from the simple orc survival instinct that anything this big might still be dangerous. Each step kicks up clouds of ancient dust that haven't been disturbed in longer than his entire species' presence on this world. The floor creaks ominously beneath his weight, old stone and metal protesting the first traffic they've experienced in millennia. Up close, the Dreadnought is even more impressive. Grisnak can see details now. The intricate Gothic script etched into armor plates, though he can't read it and wouldn't care about its meaning if he could. The purity seals that have somehow survived, dried and brittle, but still attached to the chassis. The battle damage from conflicts fought thousands of years ago, repaired but still visible as subtle variations in the armor plating. The chapter symbols that no longer match any records in Imperial databases, because the chapter itself has been destroyed, or has evolved so far beyond recognition that this ancient hero would not know his own battle brothers. Grisnak reaches out and touches the Dreadnought's leg, half expecting it to move or attack. Nothing happens. The metal is cold under his palm, inert. He grows bolder, walking around the machine's perimeter, examining it from all angles, trying to figure out how it works and, more importantly, how to get inside it. This is when he makes his critical mistake. He starts to vocalize his discovery, calling out in the crude Orkish dialect to any nearby members of his warband. The acoustics of the ancient chamber amplify his voice, carrying it through corridors and passageways that haven't heard any sound but the settling of stone and the scurrying of vermin for 6,000 years. Within minutes, other orcs begin arriving. First a few other boys from Griznak's mob, then some nobs who were exploring other sections of the ruins, then a mech boy named Zagdaka, who was already nearby examining some corroded Imperial machinery. Each new arrival reacts similarly: initial awe at the size and apparent quality of the find, followed by aggressive posturing over who has the right to claim it. Arguments break out immediately. Griznak insists he found it first, so it's his. The nobs argue that anything this valuable automatically belongs to leadership. Zagdaka the mech boy is more interested in the technical aspects, already circling the Dreadnought and examining connection points, panel seams, anything that might reveal how to access its interior or activate its systems. The arguing grows louder, more physical. Orcs shove each other, making threatening gestures with their weapons. One of the nobs, a particularly large specimen named Groktar, actually shoves Griznak aside and claims the Dreadnought for himself. This escalates to actual violence, with Griznak and several of his fellows attacking Groktar, which brings in the nob's own followers, which attracts even more orcs from surrounding areas. Within an hour of Griznak's initial discovery, there are perhaps 50 orcs in the chamber, divided into several competing factions, all arguing over ownership of the ancient war machine. The noise is tremendous, a cacophony of shouting, fighting, and the particular brand of orcish enthusiasm that emerges when they've found something they consider valuable. Zagdaka, meanwhile, has largely ignored the fighting. He's found something interesting, a panel low on the Dreadnought's back that shows signs of being removable. The seals are ancient, corroded almost beyond recognition, but his experienced eye recognizes them as access points. This is where tech priests would have connected diagnostic equipment, where maintenance would have been performed during the brief periods when the Dreadnought was active. He pulls out some of his tools, crude implements that would make an Imperial tech priest weep, but that work well enough for orc purposes. He starts working on the seals, trying to pry the panel open. The first few attempts fail. The metal is thick, designed to resist tampering. The seals, despite their age, still hold firm. Zagdaka's solution is typically orcish. He gets a bigger tool. Specifically, he gets a pry bar made from a salvaged ship strut. He wedges it into a gap near the panel edge and applies leverage. The ancient metal groans. The seals, weakened by millennia of oxidation, finally begin to give way. This is the moment when everything changes. Deep within the Dreadnought's systems, automated protocols begin activating. The machine has been disturbed. Its external sensors, still functional after all these years, detect movement, pressure, unauthorized access attempts. Emergency systems that have been dormant for 67 centuries begin their startup sequences. In the sarcophagus at the machine's heart, amniotic fluids that have been perfectly still for longer than most civilizations endure begin to circulate. Neural interfaces begin sending signals to a brain that has experienced nothing but darkness and silence for an age of the galaxy. Chemical stimulants designed to facilitate rapid awakening from stasis flood into bloodstreams that haven't truly flowed in millennia. The orcs, still arguing and fighting among themselves, are mostly oblivious to these changes. But Zagdaka, standing close enough to have his hands literally on the Dreadnought's chassis, feels something. A vibration, subtle at first, then growing stronger. A warmth beginning to emanate from the armor plating. A sound, barely audible over the din of arguing orcs, like ancient machinery grinding reluctantly to life. He steps back, suddenly uncertain. Something in his genetically programmed instincts recognizes danger when he encounters it. This isn't like looting an abandoned tank or scavenging weapons from a battlefield. This is something else, something that might not appreciate being disturbed. His warning shout is drowned out by the sudden brilliant flare of light as the Dreadnought's optical sensors activate for the first time in 67 centuries. The ancient war machine's power core, maintained in a state of minimal function for all these years, begins ramping up to combat operational status. Warning runes that haven't illuminated since before the fall of entire civilizations begin glowing on armor plating. And inside the sarcophagus, something that has been barely alive for longer than some species have existed, as civilizations begins to wake. First contact, Ork, reactions to ancient technology. The initial glow from the Dreadnought's optical sensors is dim, barely more than a faint red gleam in the gloom of the ancient chamber. But in the near darkness, after millennia of complete inactivity, it's enough to make even the most enthusiastic Ork pause. The arguing doesn't stop entirely. Orks are too bull-headed for that. But it diminishes as attention shifts from competing claims of ownership to the more immediate question of what exactly is happening to their prize. Zagdaka, the mech boy whose tampering triggered the awakening sequence, finds himself in the unfamiliar position of being the center of attention for reasons other than building something that exploded entertainingly. The other Orks are looking to him for an explanation, though they'd never admit they need an explanation from anyone. He makes a show of examining the Dreadnought's leg actuators, the power cables now beginning to hum with energy, the joints that are starting to twitch with microscopic movements. "It's waking up," he announces, which is simultaneously obvious and completely insufficient as an explanation. But Orks aren't big on complex technical descriptions. Something that was off is turning on. That's all the detail most of them need or want. The reactions split along predictable lines. The younger, less experienced Orks are torn between excitement at the prospect of the loot doing something interesting and nervousness at the possibility of it doing something dangerous. The knobs are calculating whether this development makes the Dreadnought more or less valuable, and whether they need to assert ownership more forcefully now before it becomes active, or wait to see what it does. One particularly aggressive knob, named Skargrim, makes the worst possible decision. He decides to establish dominance over the Dreadnought before it fully awakens, which in Ork terms means hitting it very hard with a large weapon. He hefts his power claw, a massive hydraulic pincer scavenged from an Imperial loading servitor and modified with additional crushing power, and moves toward the Dreadnought with obvious, hostile intent. Several things happen in rapid succession. First, the Dreadnought's automated defense protocols, designed to protect the vulnerable sarcophagus from precisely this kind of threat, register Skargrim's approach and the weapon he's carrying. Threat assessment algorithms that were cutting-edge technology 7,000 years ago, but which are still sophisticated enough to outthink most modern Imperial equipment, classify him as a hostile combatant. Second, the Dreadnought's power core, now approaching 30% of combat operational capacity, diverts energy to defensive systems. Warning klaxons that haven't sounded since the age of apostasy begin blaring from external speakers. The sound is deafening in the enclosed chamber, a repeating two-tone alert that Imperial forces would recognize as "stand back" from the Ancient One, but which just sounds like angry mechanical screaming to Orks. Third, and most dramatically, the Dreadnought moves. It's not much, just a slight adjustment of the torso position and a raising of the arm bearing the assault cannon. But for a machine that has been completely motionless for 67 centuries, for a piece of technology that most of the Orks had assumed was just an impressively armored statue, even this small movement is shocking enough to freeze every greenskin in the chamber. Skargrim, to his credit, doesn't freeze. He's committed to his chosen course of action with the single-minded determination that makes Orks such terrifying opponents. He closes the distance to the Dreadnought and swings his power claw at what looks like an access panel, intending to tear it open and get at whatever valuable components might be inside. The The Dreadnought's response is immediate and completely disproportionate to the threat. The assault cannon rotates with a whine of servos that have somehow survived millennia without maintenance. Targeting solutions are calculated, threat priority is assessed, and the ancient weapon system fires a single burst, 3 shells, each a self-contained rocket with an explosive warhead. The shells cross the 3 meters between the cannon and Skargrim in less time than it takes for an Ork nervous system to register danger. 2 miss, their targeting slightly off due to systems that haven't been properly calibrated in thousands of years. They impact the chamber wall behind Skargrim, detonating with sufficient force to crack stone that has stood for tens of thousands of years. The 3rd shell hits Skargrim's center mass, the Ork's natural toughness, which would let him survive wounds that would kill several baseline humans, proves insufficient. The explosive detonation catches him mid-swing. His power claw still extended toward the Dreadnought. The blast transforms him from a credible threat to scattered components in a fraction of a second. The chamber falls absolutely silent, except for the settling of disturbed dust and small pieces of debris. Every Ork stares at the spot where Skargrim had been standing. Then, almost in unison, they look up at the Dreadnought, which has returned to its neutral stance, assault cannons still glowing faintly from the discharge, optical sensors now burning with steady red light. This is the critical moment, the point where the Ork reaction will determine everything that follows. A human force, confronted with an awakening Dreadnought after one of their number was just explosively killed, would likely retreat to regroup and plan a more careful approach. Eldar would analyze the situation and formulate a strategy that accounted for the machine's capabilities. Tau would attempt communication and negotiate, assuming the pilot was potentially rational. Orks do none of these things. Instead, they laugh. It starts with one of the boys near the back, a deep, guttural sound of pure appreciation. The Dreadnought just killed Skargrim in the most spectacular way possible. The explosion was loud, bright, and made impressive patterns on the wall. This is exactly the kind of entertainment that Orks live for. Other greenskins take up the laugh, and within seconds the entire chamber is filled with the sound of Ork enthusiasm. "That's a proper shooter," one of them yells, gesturing at the assault cannon. "I want one." "Did you see how fast it moved?" another adds. "Skargrim didn't even have time to scream." "I'm gonna take it apart and see how it works," Zagdaka announces, his interest in the Dreadnought now increased tenfold by the demonstration of its lethality. The surviving knob, Groktar, sees an opportunity. "All right, you gits. That thing's gonna belong to the boss. We're taking it back to the scrap pile so the real mechs can figure out how to use it. Anyone who tries to keep it for themselves is gonna end up like Skargrim. Got it?" This proclamation starts a whole new round of arguments, but the dynamic has shifted. The Dreadnought is no longer just valuable loot. It's dangerous, active loot. It's a weapon that works, which makes it infinitely more interesting than a weapon that might work after sufficient modification. Every Ork in the chamber now wants to either claim it for themselves, or at least be present when it's taken apart to see how it functions. The Dreadnought, meanwhile, continues its awakening sequence, oblivious to the competing claims of ownership being shouted around it. Inside the sarcophagus, the warrior's consciousness begins the agonizing process of returning from stasis. Sensations return in stages. First awareness of existence, then recognition of the neural interface, then gradually expanding sensory input from the Dreadnought's external systems. Audio input brings the sounds of Ork voices speaking a language the ancient warrior doesn't recognize, but which he can identify as hostile based on tone and context. Visual input, still blurry as optical sensors complete their calibration, shows the interior of a chamber that should be familiar, should be the sacred hall where he was laid to rest, but which now appears damaged, occupied by unidentified combatants. Threat assessment protocols, both the machine's automated systems and the warrior's own training, from an age when the Imperium was still expanding rather than desperately defending, reached the same conclusion. He is surrounded by enemies. His chapter fortress has been compromised. He must defend his position until reinforcements arrive. The fact that no reinforcements will arrive, that his chapter fortress has been abandoned for thousands of years, that the enemies surrounding him are there more out of curiosity than hostile intent. These details are unknown to him. He knows only that he has awakened to battle, which is the only thing a dreadnought ever awakens to anymore. The dreadnought takes a single step forward, and the entire chamber seems to shake from the impact. Centuries of accumulated debris crunches beneath the weight of the armored foot. The orcs fall silent again, watching with mixed expressions of excitement and calculation as the ancient war machine fully activates for the first time in an age of the galaxy. Inside the sarcophagus, the warrior's mind clears further. He tries to access his memory banks, to understand how long he's been asleep, to determine the tactical situation. But the data is corrupted, incomplete. The last clear memory he has is of being laid to rest after a battle. He can't remember which battle, on a world whose name escapes him. Everything after that is darkness and fragmentary impressions of brief awakenings that might be memory or might be dreams. He focuses instead on the immediate situation, hostile combatants surrounding him. The number isn't clear, his sensors are still calibrating, but he estimates several dozen based on thermal signatures and movement patterns. They're armed, though their weapons appear crude, mismatched, some of them barely recognizable as weapons at all. They're speaking in an unknown language, gesticulating at him, clearly discussing something among themselves. One of them, larger than the others, is approaching. The warrior identifies weapons, some kind of modified laser gun, a blade that might be a chopper or similar melee weapon, armor that looks like scavenged pieces from multiple sources welded together haphazardly. The approaching figure is making vocalizations that the warrior's translation systems can't pass, but the tone seems both aggressive and curious rather than purely hostile. The warrior makes a decision. He activates his external voxcaster and speaks, his voice emerging from the dreadnought's speakers as a mechanical rumble that makes the orcs pause in their discussions. Identify yourselves. State your purpose in this sacred place. The orcs stare at him in confusion. Not because they don't understand the language, though they don't. Not because they're awed by the voice of an ancient warrior awakening from millennia of slumber, though a more poetic species might be. But because the giant metal thing that just killed Skargrim is now making noises at them that aren't weapon fire, and they're genuinely uncertain what to make of that. Zagdaka, the mech boy, has a different reaction. He hears the voxcaster and immediately begins analyzing its acoustic properties, wondering if he can replicate that deep mechanical timbre for his own voice amplification systems. He edges closer, trying to get a better look at the speaker grills, his natural orc curiosity about how things work temporarily, overriding his survival instincts. The warrior sees this approach and makes another threat assessment. Multiple hostiles, one approaching despite warning shot. Force evaluation suggests overwhelming numbers but possibly inferior equipment. Tactical doctrine for this situation. Demonstrate superior firepower to discourage further advances, establish defensive perimeter, attempt to restore contact with chapter command. He raises both arms, assault cannon and power fist, in a clear threat display. The orcs, even those with minimal combat experience, recognize this gesture. Several begin backing away. Zagdaka, however, continues his approach, now openly examining the dreadnought's leg joints with an expression of genuine fascination. Proper gork, he mutters, using an orc term that roughly translates to impressively mechanical. Look at those servos, and the armor's all in layers like. Bet that's why Skargrim's claw didn't even scratch it. If I could get me hands on some of that. The warrior doesn't understand the words, but he understands the intent. This is a hostile approaching to examine his chassis, possibly to identify vulnerabilities. Every instinct, both human and machine, screams that this requires immediate response. The mech boy analysis. Orkish engineering meets imperial perfection. To truly understand what happens when Zagdaka, the mech boy, examines the ancient Dreadnought, we need to appreciate the fundamental contradiction at the heart of his approach. On one hand, he possesses an instinctive understanding of machinery that would shame many imperial tech priests. On the other hand, that understanding operates on principles that make absolutely no sense to anyone who isn't an orc. Zagdaka has built weapons that should explode on first use, but instead fire reliably for months. He's created vehicles from scrap metal that shouldn't be able to move, but somehow achieve speeds that defy their visible construction. He's modified looted imperial equipment in ways that imperial engineers insist should render it completely non-functional, yet which somehow make it work better than the original design. This is possible because orc technology operates on a hybrid of actual engineering principles and psychic phenomena, and Zagdaka navigates both without consciously understanding the distinction. As he circles the Dreadnought, his mind is simultaneously processing what he sees and intuiting information that isn't directly observable. The joints, for instance, show a level of precision engineering that no orc could replicate through conventional methods. The armor plating incorporates materials that Zagdaka has never encountered, but somehow recognizes as superior to standard plasteel, or even the crude ceramite equivalents used in orc construction. The weapon systems display an integration of function and form that suggests design principles far more sophisticated than bash it until it works. But what really fascinates Zagdaka is the power distribution system. He can't see it directly, of course. The Dreadnought's internal systems are hidden behind layers of armor, but he can hear it, feel it, sense it through that peculiar orc intuition that bridges the gap between observation and understanding. The power core is humming at a frequency that suggests incredible energy density, far beyond what even the best orc generators can achieve. More importantly, the distribution is balanced, efficient, flowing through the chassis in patterns that minimize waste and maximize effectiveness. "Dis thing's proper built," he mutters to himself, his professional admiration momentarily overriding his awareness that he's standing within arm's reach of a weapon system that just killed Skargrim. Ain't no wasted power. Everything's where it should be. Even the armor's smart-like, thicker where you needs it, thinner where you don't. And look at how the joints move. No jerky-like motion. Smooth. Like it's part of the body, not just metal and servos. This last observation touches on something that Zagdaka can't fully articulate but dimly perceives. The Dreadnought isn't just being piloted in the conventional sense. The warrior inside isn't operating controls like driving a vehicle. He's interfaced directly with the machine, experiencing it as an extension of himself. This kind of neural integration is far beyond orc technology. Though some mech boys have attempted crude versions using cybernetic implants in their def dreads and kilocans, another mech boy might have left it at passive observation, content to examine from a safe distance. But Zagdaka has built his reputation on being willing to take risks that other mech boys consider excessive, which in orc terms means absolutely suicidal. He pulls out a scanning device that he cobbled together from parts of an Imperial Auspex, some Tau detection equipment, and what might be pieces of an Eldar Spirit Stone reader. The device shouldn't work. Each component comes from incompatible technology bases. Yet when Zagdaka points it at the Dreadnought, it produces readings that he finds deeply interesting. "By Mork," he breathes, studying the display. "There's something alive in there, not like an engine or nothing. Actual live meat bits, tiny ones, but they're in the middle of all the metal." This is the moment of genuine revelation for Zagdaka. He's encountered looted vehicles before, even some with servitor-like operators hardwired into the controls. But this is different. The biological components he's detecting aren't servants or slaves forced to operate the machine. They're integrated with it, part of it, existing in a symbiosis between flesh and metal that even his broad-minded orcish sensibilities find remarkable. He turns to the other orcs, who have been watching his examination with varying levels of interest. "This ain't just some shooty box on legs," he announces. "There's a git inside it. A Humi looks like, but half metal, maybe more an half. Like he's been bolted into the machine so hard, he and it is the same thing." This explanation provokes mixed reactions. Some orcs are impressed by the concept, seeing it as the ultimate expression of becoming one with your weapons. Others are disturbed in ways they can't quite articulate. Orcs value their physicality, their ability to feel a good fight in their bones and muscles. The idea of being permanently sealed in a metal shell, unable to experience battle except through sensors and servo arms, strikes them as fundamentally wrong. "So how do we get him out?" asks one of the boys. It's a practical question. If there's a Humi inside the machine, maybe they can pull him out, take the machine for themselves, modify it for proper orc use. Zagdaka considers this, studying the Dreadnought structure with renewed attention. "That's the thing," he says slowly. "I don't think you can get him out. Not without killing him anyway. All the important bits are sealed up tight in the middle, and the armor around it is, well, it's proper tough. We could cut through it, but we'd have to practically destroy the whole machine to get at the center. And once we did, I think the Humi inside would just die. He's been in there so long he probably can't live outside it no more." This presents a tactical problem that even the orcs can recognize. They can't take the Humi out to pilot the machine themselves. They might be able to destroy it, though that would require concentrated fire from multiple heavy weapons and would likely damage or destroy the very components they want to loot. They could try to capture it intact, but the demonstration of its weapon systems suggests that wouldn't be easy or safe. Or they could try something that only orcs would seriously consider. They could try to convince the Dreadnought to work for them. "Here's what we do," Groktar the Knob announces, having apparently reached the same conclusion. "We shows it that we're the best fighters on this rock. We proves we're worthy of having such a good weapon on our side. We makes it see that fighting for us is better than fighting against us." The logic, by orc standards, is sound. Everything in their culture is established through demonstrated strength. If they can prove they're strong enough, tough enough, orky enough, surely the Humi in the machine will recognize their superiority and join them. The fact that this completely misunderstands both Imperial culture and the nature of Dreadnought pilots doesn't occur to them. Zagdaka, however, is still focused on the technical aspects. "I could maybe rig up something to talk to it," he suggests. "The machine's got speakers, and I bet it can hear too. If we could figure out how to speak proper Humi, we might be able to tell it what we want." This idea gains traction despite its obvious flaws. None of the orcs speak Imperial Gothic or any other human language beyond a few crude phrases picked up from prisoners or captured communications. But Zagdaka thinks he might be able to create a translator, possibly by modifying some captured Vox equipment and running it through a cogitator that he looted from an Imperial command post. While the orcs debate these options, the Dreadnought has been running its own assessment of the situation. The warrior inside has been listening to the orc vocalizations, his advanced audio sensors picking up every word despite his inability to understand the language. His translation systems have been analyzing the speech patterns, trying to identify linguistic roots, building a basic framework of meaning from context and repetition. He's reached several conclusions. First, these are clearly greenskins, a species he fought against in what he remembers as his mortal life. Second, they haven't attacked en masse despite having the numbers to overwhelm him, which suggests either unusual tactical sophistication or some motive beyond simple violence. Third, one of them appears to be examining his chassis with what seems like genuine technical interest, rather than immediate hostile intent. The warrior considers his options. He could open fire, attempt to eliminate as many hostiles as possible before they coordinate an effective response. But combat doctrine suggests conserving ammunition when surrounded and cut off from resupply. He could attempt to break through their lines and escape, but his sensors indicate he's deep underground in a structure that appears partially collapsed. Navigation without chapter maps or guidance would be problematic. Or he could wait, observe, attempt to understand the situation before committing to violent action. This goes against every combat instinct. But 6,750 years of existence have taught him that patience sometimes yields better results than immediate aggression. He focuses his sensors on the orc that appeared to be examining him most closely. The greenskin is smaller than the largest specimens present, but carries himself with an authority that suggests technical expertise rather than combat prowess. His equipment appears to be a hodgepodge of scavenged technology from multiple sources, none of it matching, all of it apparently functional, despite looking like it should fall apart at any moment. The warrior makes a decision that surprises even himself. He lowers his weapon slightly, moving from immediate combat stance to a posture that suggests readiness without active aggression. It's a calculated risk, an attempt to signal that he's willing to observe rather than immediately attack. The orcs notice the change immediately. The argument's quiet as they watch the Dreadnought's arms lower. Some interpret this as weakness, a sign that the machine is running out of power or ammunition. Others, including Zagdaka, recognize it as something more interesting, a conscious choice, evidence of intelligence and tactical decision-making beyond simple automated responses. "See?" Zagdaka says, pointing at the Dreadnought. "It's thinking. It knows we could rush it if we all went at once, and it's trying to work out what to do about that. Smart for a Hume machine. Maybe we can work with it instead of just bashing it." This suggestion divides the orc mob. Half see the wisdom in attempting cooperation with such a powerful weapon system. The other half think this is the most un-orcish thing they've ever heard, and that they should just charge in and bash it until it either works for them or breaks into valuable scrap. The debate continues, voices rising, shoving matches breaking out, all while the ancient Dreadnought stands in the center of the chamber, watching, analyzing, and trying to understand what kind of situation it's awakened into after millennia of darkness. Breaching attempts. Violence meets adamantium. The orc debate about how to handle the Dreadnought continues for approximately 12 minutes before the inevitable happens. Someone gets impatient and decides to take direct action. This someone is a younger orc named Grutznag, who has less experience and more enthusiasm than is advisable even by orc standards. Grutznag's reasoning, such as it is, goes something like this. The Dreadnought lowered its weapons, which means it's either weak or scared. Either way, it's showing submission. And orcs don't respect submission. They respect strength. Therefore, the correct approach is to demonstrate strength by attacking the machine and forcing it to acknowledge orc superiority. He charges forward with a roar that's meant to be intimidating, but comes across as more enthusiastic than threatening. His weapon is a massive wrench that he's been using as a combination tool and club, and he swings it at the Dreadnought's leg with all the force his considerable orc muscles can generate. The wrench connects with the adamantium armor plating and produces a sound like a cathedral bell being struck by a smaller cathedral. The impact reverberates through the chamber, rattling debris and sending clouds of ancient dust into the air. The wrench itself deforms noticeably from the impact, its crude metal composition unable to withstand the force of hitting something essentially indestructible. The Dreadnought doesn't even shift position. The blow, which would have been sufficient to dent or even breach standard Imperial armor, leaves not even a scratch on the ancient chassis. Grutznag stares at his now bent wrench in confusion, then back at the Dreadnought's leg, then at his wrench again, as if trying to determine which part of reality has failed him. The warrior inside the Dreadnought registers the attack through his sensory systems. Threat assessment classifies it as minor, insufficient to penetrate armor, barely noticeable except as a data point indicating hostile intent. His response is calculated and measured. The power fist rises, not quickly, deliberately slow enough that anyone watching can see it happening and understand the implication. Grutznag, to his credit, recognizes the danger. He attempts to back away, but the power fist is already descending, not toward Grutznag himself. That would be wasteful given the minimal threat he represents. Instead, toward the ground where he's standing. The impact creates a crater in the ancient stone floor and sends a shockwave through the chamber that knocks Grutznag off his feet, along with several nearby orcs who were standing too close. The message is clear even to the densest greenskin. I could have killed you. I chose not to. Do not make me reconsider that choice. This demonstration of restraint, coupled with overwhelming potential for violence, has an interesting effect on the orc mob. Those who were advocating for immediate assault reconsider their position. Those who were suggesting more cautious approaches feel vindicated. And several, including Zagdaka, develop a new level of respect for whatever intelligence is guiding the Dreadnought's actions. Right then, Groktar announces, stepping forward with the authority of his position as the ranking Nobi present. Nobody else tries bashing it until we figures out a better plan. Zagdaka, you work on that translator thing you was talking about. The rest of your gits, spread out and make sure no other mobs come nosing around. This is our loot, and I ain't sharing it with nobody. The orcs disperse to follow these orders, though several remain in the chamber watching the Dreadnought with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation. Zagdaka immediately begins sorting through his collection of scavenged equipment, pulling out components that he thinks might be useful for creating a communication device. Meanwhile, other orcs are less patient about following Groktar's directives. A small group decides that what the NOB meant was, don't bash it until we have a better plan to bash it with, which is a subtle but important distinction in their minds. They withdraw to a nearby chamber and begin assembling what they consider a better plan. Their solution involves a substantial quantity of explosives, not sophisticated shaped charges or precisely calculated demolitions. This is orc ordnance, unstable, overpowered, likely to detonate prematurely, and exactly the kind of thing that seems like a good idea right up until it explodes in ways nobody expected. They spend about an hour assembling what amounts to a massive bomb, layering together various types of explosives they've accumulated, Imperial frag grenades with their safety mechanisms removed, orc stick bombs that were already unstable before being stacked together, some captured tau photon charges that nobody is entirely sure how to use, and for good measure, several barrels of promethium that someone thought would make Dar-Bang bigger. Their plan, such as it is, involves placing this improvised bomb next to the Dreadnought, lighting the fuse, a concept they're applying very loosely given the mixture of trigger mechanisms involved, and running very fast in the opposite direction. They estimate this will either crack open the Dreadnought's armor, allowing access to its interior components, or create such a spectacular explosion that they won't mind not getting the loot. What they haven't considered is that the Dreadnought's sensors are sophisticated enough to detect the chemical signatures of explosives from quite a distance, and the warrior inside has enough combat experience to recognize an improvised explosive device when his sensors paint one for him. The orcs maneuver their bomb into position, which requires rolling it on a crude cart, because even they aren't willing to carry that much unstable ordnance by hand. They're remarkably quiet about it, by orc standards, which means only moderately louder than a small artillery barrage. They get the bomb positioned about 3 meters from the Dreadnought's left leg, start various timers and fuses, and run for cover. The Dreadnought responds with the kind of tactical efficiency that comes from thousands of years of combat experience. The assault cannon swivels and fires a single burst, 3 shells, not at the bomb itself, but at the orcs who just placed it. The shells pass over their heads, deliberate near misses intended to drive them to ground and away from their cover position. Then, with surprising speed for something of its size, the Dreadnought steps sideways away from the bomb, pivots, and brings up one armored leg. The stomp that follows demonstrates several thousand kilograms of armored war machine impacting unstable explosives from above. The resulting explosion is spectacular. Multiple types of ordnance detonate simultaneously, creating a blast wave that blows out the last remaining windows in the chamber and collapses a section of ceiling. The promethium ignites, adding a fireball to the concussion wave. The various chemical reactions interact in ways the orcs who assembled the bomb neither predicted nor would have understood. The Dreadnought, having positioned itself on the far side of its own armored mass from the explosion, weathers the blast with minimal damage. The leg that stomped the bomb takes the brunt of the force. But adamantium armor, designed to withstand anti-tank weaponry, isn't seriously compromised by Ork improvised explosives, even when initiated at point-blank range. When the smoke clears, the Dreadnought stands essentially unharmed. The chamber is considerably more damaged. The floor where the bomb was positioned is now a crater. The Orks who planted it are scattered across the chamber, their crude armor having protected them from the worst of the explosion, but leaving them stunned, concussed, and in several cases, on fire. The warrior inside the Dreadnought takes a moment to assess the damage to his chassis. Surface scoring on the leg armor, some sensor damage that his systems are already routing around. One of his optical sensors is occluded by debris, but the redundant systems compensate. Overall assessment: minimal degradation to combat effectiveness. The explosion was impressive, but ultimately ineffective against Imperial engineering, designed to survive far worse. He files this incident under greenskin tactical incompetence and returns his attention to the broader situation. The Orks are clearly attempting to either capture or destroy him, but their methods demonstrate a concerning combination of resourcefulness and stupidity. They have access to substantial quantities of ordnance and aren't afraid to use it, but they lack the sophistication to deploy it effectively. In the chamber's entrance, Groktar arrives at a run, alerted by the explosion. He surveys the damage, the scattered and stunned Orks, the Dreadnought standing essentially unharmed in the center of the destruction, and his face goes through several interesting color changes. "Which one of you gits," he roars, "decided that blasting the valuable loot was a good idea?" The Orks who planted the bomb try to explain their reasoning, but Groktar isn't interested in explanations. He makes his displeasure known through the traditional Ork method of hitting them with various heavy objects until they stop talking. This takes several minutes and involves a considerable amount of shouting. Zagdaka, who has been working on his translator device in a side chamber and was therefore safely away from the explosion, arrives to see what the commotion is about. He surveys the damage with the eye of a professional and whistles appreciatively. "That's some tough armor," he observes, examining the Dreadnought's leg from a safe distance. "Took a bomb that should have killed half the boys in this section and it ain't even got a proper dent. Whatever this thing is made of, we need to get us some." This sparks a new line of thinking among several Orks. If they can't break the Dreadnought open, maybe they can cut pieces off it to use in their own equipment. Armor this strong would be invaluable for making tougher vehicles or better protective gear for nobs and war bosses. One Ork produces a cutting torch, a device scavenged from an Imperial industrial facility and modified to burn approximately 3 times hotter than the original design, at the cost of going through fuel at an alarming rate and occasionally exploding. He approaches the Dreadnought cautiously, aware that previous direct contact attempts have not gone well. "Oi!" he calls out to the Dreadnought, as if the ancient war machine might understand him or care about his intentions. "I'm just gonna try taking a little bit of your armor, yeah? Won't even notice it's gone." He ignites the torch and moves toward the Dreadnought's leg, aiming for a section that looks like it might be accessible. The warrior inside recognizes the tool for what it is, a plasma cutter. Not powerful enough to seriously threaten his armor, but certainly capable of damaging surface systems or creating weak points that could be exploited later. The response is measured, but firm. The power fist moves, not to strike the Ork, but to position itself between the cutting torch and the armor. When the Ork tries to work around it, the fist follows, making it clear that this approach won't be permitted. The Ork tries several different angles, increasingly frustrated, while the power fist continues to intercept each attempt. Finally, in a moment of inspiration or desperation, the Ork tries to cut the power fist itself. The torch's plasma flame makes contact with the adamantium of the fist's outer casing and produces absolutely no visible effect. The Ork stares at this impossibility for several seconds, then shuts off the torch and backs away. "All right, Den," he mutters. "Guess we ain't taking bits off it." This series of failed attempts at breaching or damaging the Dreadnought has an educational effect on the Ork mob. They're beginning to understand that this isn't just another piece of loot they can bash apart and distribute. This is something requiring a different approach, something that demands respect for its capabilities, even if they don't fully understand what those capabilities are. Zagdaka, watching all of this, makes notes in his own way, memory rather than written records. He's learning about the Dreadnought's defensive capabilities, its apparent awareness of threats, the precision of its movements, the sophistication of its targeting systems. All of this information will be useful when he attempts to either communicate with it or, failing that, build his own version using whatever Ork ingenuity and psychic influence can accomplish. The warrior inside the Dreadnought has also been learning. He's confirmed that the Greenskins, while numerous and well-armed by their standards, lack the tactical coordination or heavy weaponry necessary to seriously threaten him. Their attempts at breaching his armor have been ineffective to the point of being almost comical. But their persistence concerns him. They're not giving up despite repeated failures, and eventually, they might stumble upon a method that actually works. He needs intelligence. He needs to understand where he is, how long he's been dormant, what's happened to his chapter, whether there are other Imperial forces on this world. The Greenskins clearly won't provide this information, but perhaps if he can break free of this chamber, he can find answers elsewhere in the ruins. The decision is made. He will attempt to leave this position, fight through the Greenskins if necessary, and search for some indication of what's happened in the time since he was laid to rest. If his chapter still exists, if there are Imperial forces anywhere on this world, he needs to make contact and report the Greenskin infestation. The Dreadnought's legs lock into place as power diverts to servos and hydraulic systems. The warrior inside takes what passes for a deep breath, a useless human gesture that his current form doesn't require, but which he performs anyway out of habit from his mortal life. Then, for the first time in 6,750 years, he attempts to walk. The awakening. When the ancient stirs. The first step is almost catastrophic. Systems that have been dormant for nearly 7 millennia protest violently as they're called upon to support and move several thousand kilograms of adamantium and ceramite. Servos whine at frequencies that should indicate imminent failure. Hydraulic lines that have maintained pressure through stasis but haven't experienced flow surge with fluid that hasn't moved in longer than some civilizations have existed. Joint assemblies that have been perfectly still for ages complain with grinding sounds that make even the Orks wince. But Imperial engineering, especially the ancient and irreplaceable engineering that went into Dreadnought construction, was built to last. The systems hold, the joints move, the servos compensate for resistance. The hydraulics maintain pressure despite shock loads they were never designed to handle after such extended dormancy. The Dreadnought takes its first complete step, and the chamber shakes from the impact. Inside the sarcophagus, the warrior experiences the movement through his neural interface. It's simultaneously familiar and alien. Familiar because muscle memory, even when the muscles are metal and the memory is digital, never fully fades. Alien because the last time he walked, he had actual legs, actual muscles, actual bones. The sensations feeding back through the neural interface are correct, accurate representations of what the Dreadnought is experiencing, but they're not quite real in the way that organic sensation is real. He pushes through the dissonance and takes another step. This one is smoother, the systems having completed their initial calibration and adjusted to active operation. A third step, and he's moving with something approaching the ponderous grace that Dreadnoughts are capable of when properly maintained and operated. The Orks, who had been arguing among themselves about the next approach to try, fall silent as they watch the Dreadnought begin moving with obvious purpose. This is different from the small defensive movements it made earlier. This is intentional locomotion, the machine clearly intending to go somewhere. Several of them begin backing away, not quite running, but definitely creating distance between themselves and something they're starting to recognize as more dangerous than they initially appreciated. Groktar the Knob makes a quick tactical decision. If the Dreadnought is trying to leave, that means it's either running away, which would be disappointing but survivable, or it's heading somewhere specific, which might lead them to more valuable loot or better understanding of how to capture this prize. Either way, following it seems like the best option. "All right, you gits," he bellows to the assembled orcs. "The big metal git is on the move. We're following it, but don't get in its way unless you wants to end up like Scargrim. Spread out and stay behind it, and someone go tell the boss that we found something really good." The orcs comply with varying levels of discipline. The more experienced ones understand the wisdom of not crowding something that's already demonstrated lethal capabilities. The younger ones need to be physically restrained or threatened to prevent them from rushing forward in their enthusiasm. Within a few minutes, a rough formation has established itself, the Dreadnought moving purposefully toward the chamber exit, with approximately 40 orcs trailing behind at what they consider a safe distance. The warrior inside registers the following greenskins but doesn't consider them an immediate threat. His sensors paint them as clearly as if he could see them with organic eyes. Better, actually, given that his thermal imaging and motion detection provide data that human vision never could. They're maintaining distance, not attempting to impede his movement, seemingly content to observe rather than attack. Acceptable for now. His immediate problem is navigation. The chamber he was laid to rest in should connect to other parts of the fortress monastery through specific passages that he should remember from his mortal life. But the passages he's encountering don't match his memories. Corridors that should exist are collapsed. Walls that should open to specific halls are sealed or missing entirely. The entire structure has been damaged, modified, or has simply decayed beyond recognition in the time he's been dormant. He's forced to navigate by exploration rather than memory, which means moving cautiously through unfamiliar spaces while maintaining awareness of the greenskins following him. This would be challenging enough if he was in a familiar environment with recent operational experience. But after millennia of stasis, with his memory of the fortress monastery's layout unreliable and possibly outdated, it becomes an exercise in careful sensor use and tactical flexibility. The first corridor he chooses ends in a collapsed ceiling after approximately 50 meters. The way is completely blocked by tons of fallen stone and metal that not even a dreadnought could force through without extensive excavation. He reverses course, the orcs parting to let him pass in their attempt to stay out of his path, and tries a different route. This passage is partially intact, though the floor shows concerning instability. Each step sends small cascades of debris skittering across damaged stonework. The walls lean inward at angles that suggest structural failure could occur at any moment. The dreadnought's weight, far greater than the floor was ever designed to support for mobile traffic. Dreadnoughts were meant to be moved on specialized platforms when inactive. Creates ominous creaking sounds that make even the relatively fearless orcs nervous. The warrior proceeds anyway. He has limited options and needs to find either an exit to the surface or some kind of command center that might still have functional communications equipment. The risk of structural collapse is acceptable compared to remaining trapped in the lower levels with an unknown number of greenskins and no intelligence about the broader tactical situation. The passage opens into what the warrior recognizes, after a moment of confused sensor analysis, as what was once the fortress monastery's librarium. The vast chamber that should contain thousands of sacred texts and historical records is now a ruin. The shelving has collapsed, creating massive piles of debris. What few books survived the initial destruction have long since deteriorated to powder. The reading desks where scholars once studied are crushed beneath fallen masonry. The entire space screams of abandonment and the passage of unfathomable time. But there, in the far corner, the warrior's sensors detect something that makes his dual hearts, such as they are, surge with hope. A console, partially buried but showing faint energy readings. Emergency power, minimal but active. This could be a terminal connected to whatever fragment of the monastery's systems might still be operational. He moves toward it, his steps now faster, less cautious. The orcs follow, chattering among themselves in their incomprehensible language, clearly excited by the change in the dreadnought's behavior. Several run ahead, curious about what the machine is moving toward, heedless of the danger this might represent. The warrior reaches the console and extends his power fist carefully, using manipulators that were designed for crushing tanks now employed to gently clear debris from the terminal. It takes several minutes of delicate work, and the Orks crowd closer to watch this unexpected demonstration of precision from something they'd seen only as a weapon. Finally, the console is clear enough to access. The warrior extends a mechadendrite, one of several maintenance tentacles integrated into the Dreadnought chassis for field repairs and equipment interface. The mechadendrite's connector attempts to mate with the console's input port. The connectors don't quite match. Millennia of technological drift has changed even basic interface standards. But with some manipulation, the connection is made. Data begins flowing. Not much. The console is running on emergency power only, and most of its memory banks are corrupted. But enough. Enough to paint a picture that the warrior inside the Dreadnought finds almost impossible to accept. Current date, 459.M41, approximately. 6,750 years since his internment. His chapter, The Angels Resplendent, is listed as destroyed in a warp storm approximately 5,000 years ago. The fortress monastery was abandoned 4,500 years ago, following devastating Ork attacks, the same attacks that presumably cut him off from his brethren. The planet itself has changed hands multiple times, currently held by no one, contested territory in a sector of space that has seen continuous warfare for millennia. The data includes fragments of records, corrupted and incomplete, but devastating in their implications. Names of battle brothers he knew, all listed as long dead. Campaigns he participated in, now classified as ancient history. Technologies he helped test, now either lost or considered archaic. Even the Imperium itself has changed, evolved, decayed in ways the fragmentary records hint at, but don't fully explain. The warrior processes this information, his enhanced mind racing through implications and extrapolations. He has been asleep for nearly 7,000 years. Everything he knew is gone. Everyone he fought beside is dust. His chapter doesn't exist. His fortress monastery is a ruin, and he's surrounded by greenskins who view him as loot rather than as a defender of humanity. The psychological impact of this realization would destroy a normal human. Even a space marine might struggle with it, but a warrior who has already endured centuries of half-life in a metal tomb, who has already lost so much of his humanity to the machine, who has already accepted that his existence is one of duty rather than life, processes it differently. Not without pain, the capacity for emotional response hasn't been completely erased, but with a grim acceptance that comes from having already lost everything that mattered except the purpose of continuing to fight. He withdraws from the console, mechadendrite retracting into its housing. The Orks, who have been watching this interaction with confused interest, wait to see what the Dreadnought will do next. The warrior considers his options. They're limited. There are no Imperial forces on this world to contact. There are no chapter serfs to perform maintenance and reactivation rituals. There is no one who even knows he exists, except these greenskins. But there's something else in the data he pulled from the console. Something that changes the tactical situation significantly. The greenskins aren't just random looters. They're the vanguard of a much larger force, a green tide that's sweeping across this sector. Millions of them, possibly billions, led by a war boss whose name translates roughly as Planet Killer, and who has already destroyed 3 Imperial worlds and is targeting a 4th. The Angels Resplendent are gone, but the Imperium endures. Humanity persists, and if this greenskin force isn't stopped, it will continue its rampage across worlds that the warrior once helped defend or fought to claim for the Emperor. The decision crystallizes with absolute clarity. He cannot return to stasis. There's no one to perform the rituals. He cannot seek out his chapter. They don't exist. He cannot contact Imperial authorities. There are none on this world. But he can fight. Fighting is what he was made for, what he was rebuilt for, what he's been doing for longer than some species have existed. The enemy is different. The circumstances have changed, but the fundamental purpose remains. He will hunt this planet-killer war boss. He will disrupt the Greenskin advance. He will fulfill his oath to defend the Imperium, even if the Imperium doesn't know he exists, even if he must do so alone, even if it means final destruction rather than return to peaceful stasis. Better to fall in battle than to rust away in a forgotten tomb, while enemies of humanity run unchallenged. The warrior turns away from the console, his decision made. The Orks, still watching, don't understand the significance of what just happened. They see only that the metal Humi has finished looking at the old machine and is now turning toward them with purpose that wasn't present before. Zagdaka, who has been more observant than most, notices something in the Dreadnought's posture. The weapons aren't raised in immediate threat, but there's a tension in the chassis that wasn't there before. The optical sensors seem brighter, more focused. The entire machine radiates a sense of purpose that makes his Orc survival instincts ping warnings. Boss, he says quietly to Groktar. I think something just changed. The metal Humi looks like it's made up its mind about something, and I don't think we're gonna like what it decided. Groktar studies the Dreadnought for a moment, then nods slowly. Right. Tell the boys to back off a bit, give it some space, and get ready to run if it starts shooting for real this time. The warrior inside the Dreadnought has made his own assessment of the situation. These particular greenskins aren't his primary target. They're obstacles at worst, tactical opportunities at best. If they can lead him to their war boss, or to concentrations of greenskin forces, they're actually useful. If they try to stop him, they'll be eliminated. The calculus is simple and absolute. He begins moving again, not toward the exit from the chamber, but toward a different passageway that his sensors indicate might lead upward toward the surface. The Orcs scramble to maintain their following positions, shouting to each other in their language, clearly uncertain whether they're escorting valuable loot or following something that's about to kill them all. Behind them, deep in the machinery of the ancient Dreadnought, systems continue warming up to full combat readiness. Weapons systems that have been dormant for millennia complete their activation sequences. Ammunition feeds that have been perfectly preserved in stasis begin loading shells into firing chambers. Targeting computers that once helped coordinate entire battles begin painting every greenskin in the chamber, calculating firing solutions, determining optimal kill order and ammunition expenditure. The ancient warrior is awakening not just to consciousness, but to purpose, and that purpose is singular. Find the enemy, close with the enemy, destroy the enemy. That this enemy happens to be following him with apparent friendly intent is a complexity he'll deal with when necessary. For now, they're useful guides toward whatever greater concentrations of greenskin forces exist on this world. The hunt has begun. Combat scenarios. Ancient warrior versus savage horde. The first actual combat engagement happens entirely by accident. The Dreadnought and its unwitting Orc escort are navigating through a partially collapsed transit corridor when they encounter a different mob of greenskins coming from the opposite direction. This new mob is larger, approximately 60 Orcs led by a particularly massive knob named Scragbad, and they're hauling what appears to be parts of a looted Imperial tank. The two groups of Orcs see each other and immediately begin the traditional greenskin negotiation process, shouting loudly about who has rights to which territory and which loot. The Dreadnought is briefly forgotten as the two mobs work up to inevitable violence, with insults escalating and posturing becoming more aggressive. The warrior inside the Dreadnought observes this interaction with interest. The greenskins are clearly divided into competing factions rather than a unified force. This creates tactical opportunities. Divided enemies are easier to destroy, and if he can position himself to appear aligned with one faction, the other faction will likely attack him, providing justification for his own combat response. But before he can formulate a specific plan to exploit this division, one of Scragbad's boys points at the Dreadnought and shouts something in excited Orcish. The translation is unnecessary. The body language and pointing make the meaning clear. The new mob has spotted valuable loot and wants to claim it for themselves. Groktar, representing the faction that has been following the Dreadnought, responds with aggressive territoriality. This loot is theirs. They found it first. Any attempt to take it will result in immediate violence. Skragbad counters that possession is determined by who can hold on to it, and his mob is larger and better armed. The warrior makes a quick threat assessment. 2 groups of greenskins, approximately 100 total, now converging on his position. Most armed with crude kinetic weapons, a few heavy weapons visible, some kind of rocket launcher, what might be a looted Imperial heavy bolter, several large melee weapons. Vehicle parts being carried could be repurposed as improvised fortifications or weapons. Terrain is enclosed corridor with limited maneuverability. Tactical doctrine for this situation is clear. Establish fields of fire, eliminate heaviest threats first, maintain mobility to prevent encirclement. The corridor's confines actually work in his favor. The greenskins can't spread out to surround him, and his superior firepower will be more effective in the restricted space. The decision to initiate combat is taken out of his hands when one of Skragbad's orcs, either braver or stupider than his fellows, charges the Dreadnought with what appears to be an improvised explosive device. The warrior's targeting systems acquire the threat, calculate trajectory and timing, and determine that the optimal response is immediate, overwhelming force. The assault cannon speaks. Not a short burst this time, but a sustained salvo. 20 shells in rapid succession, each a miniature rocket with explosive warhead. The corridor erupts in a storm of detonations. The orc with the explosive device disappears in the first 3 impacts. The explosions continue, tracking through the packed mob of greenskins, each impact creating a kill radius that claims multiple targets. The sound is apocalyptic in the enclosed space. Orc hearing, never particularly acute to begin with, is overwhelmed by the continuous thunder of detonations. The muzzle flash from the assault cannon creates a strobing effect that makes it difficult to see. Smoke from propellant and explosive begins filling the corridor, reducing visibility to near zero for organic eyes. But the Dreadnought's sensors aren't organic. Thermal imaging, motion detection, and mass sensing systems paint a perfect tactical picture despite the smoke and chaos. The targeting computer continues tracking, acquiring new threats, adjusting firing solutions. The assault cannon continues firing until the ammunition counter indicates the magazine is depleted. 47 seconds of sustained fire. 280 shells expended. Approximately 35 greenskins confirmed eliminated. The remaining greenskins in both mobs are scattering, some retreating back the way they came, others pressing forward in attack. A few simply standing in shock, trying to process what just happened. The warrior doesn't allow them time to organize a response. He charges forward, the Dreadnought's massive frame covering the distance to the nearest greenskins with surprising speed. The power fist activates, energy fields crackling along the adamantium fingers. Each strike eliminates an orc, crushing them against corridor walls or simply pulverizing them through sheer kinetic impact. What follows is less a battle and more a massacre. The greenskins are tough, resilient, dangerous in the right circumstances, but these aren't the right circumstances. They're trapped in a confined space with a weapon system designed for exactly this kind of close-quarters combat. Their crude weapons spark off armor that was built to withstand anti-tank fire. Their heaviest melee weapons, wielded by their strongest fighters, can't generate the force necessary to breach adamantium plating. And the warrior inside the Dreadnought is fighting with the experience of 7,000 years, with tactical training from an age when the Imperium was still conquering rather than merely surviving, with reflexes that are partly organic instinct and partly computer-assisted targeting, all integrated through a neural interface that makes the Dreadnought's movements as natural as breathing once was. The fight lasts approximately 4 minutes. When it's over, 87 greenskins are dead or dying. The corridor is painted in colors that would make even veteran Imperial guardsmen nauseous. The remaining Orks, approximately 15 from the combined mobs, including Groktar and Zagdaka, have withdrawn to what they consider a safe distance and are watching the Dreadnought with new understanding. This isn't loot. This isn't a machine they can capture and control. This is a weapon of war, and they're the prey it was designed to destroy. Groktar makes a decision. His mob has been trying to claim this Dreadnought as their own, but maybe that's backwards. Maybe the better approach is to present their clan to the Dreadnought as allies, rather than trying to claim the Dreadnought as their possession. It's not a natural Ork thought process, admitting that something else might be the real leader. But Groktar has survived as long as he has by being smarter than average, and he's smart enough to recognize when he's outclassed. "Oi!" he shouts at the Dreadnought, stepping forward with his hands raised in what he hopes is a non-threatening gesture. "We ain't looking to fight ya. That lot that just got crumped, they were trying to take our loot. You helped us keep it. That means you's all right in our book. How about you comes with us to see our boss? We's got lots more gits to crump, and you's clearly good at it." The warrior inside the Dreadnought considers this unexpected development. His translation systems have been analyzing Orkish speech patterns throughout the encounter, and while he still can't understand most of what's being said, he can recognize tone and intent. The greenskin is making some kind of offer, possibly seeking alliance rather than continued hostility. Tactically, this presents interesting possibilities. An alliance with greenskins is heretical, unthinkable, absolutely contrary to every principle of Imperial doctrine. But the warrior has already accepted that he's operating outside normal parameters. His chapter is gone. There are no Imperial forces on this world. The situation is unique enough that traditional doctrine may not apply. And if these greenskins can lead him to larger concentrations of their kind, if they can provide intelligence on the location and strength of the warboss forces he plans to attack, they're more valuable as temporary allies than as immediate targets. The calculus is cold, tactical, entirely focused on accomplishing the mission objective: disrupt the greenskin advance and eliminate the warboss threatening Imperial worlds. He makes a gesture with the power fist, a lowering of the weapon from combat position to a neutral stance. It's not quite agreement, but it's an indication that he's willing to observe rather than immediately attack. The greenskins interpret this as acceptance, though whether that interpretation is correct remains to be seen. Zagdaka approaches cautiously, still carrying his translator device which he's been working on throughout the journey. "I think I got this working now," he says, more to himself than anyone else. He adjusts some settings, routes the signal through a captured Imperial Voxcaster, and attempts to speak in what he believes is Imperial Gothic. "You talk us?" emerges from the device in a horrible mangling of language that's technically Gothic, but so heavily accented and grammatically broken that it's barely comprehensible. The warrior's language systems, however, are sophisticated enough to pass the meaning despite the delivery. They're attempting communication. This is unexpected but potentially useful. He activates his own Voxcaster and responds in proper Gothic, his mechanical voice carrying the weight of 7,000 years. "I comprehend your intent. State your purpose and allegiance." The Orks stare at the Dreadnought in confusion. The translator device crackles and produces something vaguely recognizable as Orkish. Zagdaka fiddles with the settings some more, trying to improve the translation quality, muttering complaints about Hume machines being too complicated. After several minutes of adjustment, a relatively comprehensible conversation becomes possible. The translation is rough, full of errors and misunderstandings, but it's enough for basic communication. Through this awkward medium, Groktar attempts to explain that his mob is part of a larger clan serving Warboss Gurnak Planet Killer, and that if the Dreadnought wants to fight more greenskins, they can lead him to targets. The warrior processes this information. The name Planet Killer matches the data he retrieved from the console. This is the warboss whose forces are threatening Imperial space, These greenskins are actually part of the very invasion force he plans to attack. The irony of being escorted by his eventual targets toward his eventual objective doesn't escape him. He responds carefully, keeping his statements simple enough for the crude translator to handle. "I seek the one you call Planet Killer. You will bring me to him." The Orks interpret this as a desire to join their crusade, to fight alongside them in glorious battle. They argue among themselves about the wisdom of bringing the Dreadnought to their boss, about whether they'll get credit for recruiting such a powerful warrior, about what this might mean for their standing in the clan. Zagdaka has a different concern. He's been analyzing the Dreadnought's combat performance, and he's realized something that the others haven't quite grasped yet. This machine isn't just strong or well-armored, it's smart. It fights with precision and tactical awareness that no Ork vehicle or machine ever displays. Whatever is inside it is making decisions, real thinking, not just following programmed responses. "Dat thing in the metal," he says to Groktar quietly. "He ain't on our side. I think he's just using us to get where he wants to go. And where he wants to go might not be good for us." Groktar considers this, watching the Dreadnought as it scans the corridor and the bodies of the fallen greenskins. "Maybe," he admits, "but maybe not. Maybe we gets him to the boss, and the boss crumps him proper. Or maybe the boss convinces him to fight for us for real. Either way, we gets credit for bringing him in. That's worth something." The decision is made. The surviving Orks from both mobs, having witnessed the Dreadnought's capabilities and concluded that challenging it would be fatal, form an uneasy alliance to escort the war machine to their clan's primary encampment. The journey will take several days through dangerous territory, and they'll encounter other greenskin mobs along the way. The warrior inside the Dreadnought accepts this arrangement. He needs intelligence, he needs to locate the war boss, and he needs to preserve ammunition for when it will matter most. If the greenskins want to lead him directly to their leader, he'll permit it. What happens when he arrives, when he stands before this planet killer war boss and reveals his true intent? That's a problem for the future. For now, he walks among enemies who think he's an ally, a weapon of the Imperium disguised as greenskin loot, gathering strength and intelligence for the battle to come. Alternative outcomes: Ork innovation and adaptation. Not every encounter between Orks and an ancient Dreadnought needs to end in immediate violence or uneasy alliance. The nature of Ork culture, with its peculiar mixture of brutal practicality and unexpected ingenuity, creates possibilities that more rigid species might never consider. To understand these alternative scenarios, we need to examine what might happen if the Orks approach the situation from different angles. Consider the possibility that the Ork mob includes a particularly gifted mech boy, someone like Zagdaka, but with an even deeper intuitive understanding of machines. This mech boy examines the Dreadnought and recognizes that while they can't break into it or control it directly, they might be able to interact with it in ways that benefit both parties. The mech boy's insight is that the Dreadnought needs things: ammunition, fuel, maintenance, possibly even information. And the Orks have access to all of these, at least in their own crude way. If they can establish a trade relationship, providing the Dreadnought with what it needs in exchange for its combat support, they create a symbiotic arrangement rather than attempting domination or destruction. This leads to a fascinating negotiation conducted through improvised translation devices and lots of gesturing. The Orks offer to scavenge ammunition compatible with the Dreadnought's weapons. They offer to find fuel cells or power sources. They offer to search the ruins for ancient Imperial equipment that might contain useful components. In exchange, the Dreadnought helps them fight rival mobs, defends their territory, assists in major raids. The warrior inside the Dreadnought faces an unprecedented moral and tactical dilemma. Accepting Ork assistance means becoming dependent on enemies of the Imperium, but refusing means potentially running out of ammunition or power, becoming a useless metal statue when he should be actively defending humanity. The pragmatic choice is clear, even if the philosophical implications are troubling. What emerges is one of the strangest alliances in Warhammer 40k lore, an ancient Imperial Dreadnought working alongside Orks in a relationship that's mutually beneficial but fundamentally unstable. The Dreadnought fights with the Orks against other greenskin mobs, but he's always calculating, always planning for the eventual betrayal. The Orks treat the Dreadnought as valuable loot that they happen to be maintaining rather than as a true ally, always scheming about how to eventually crack it open and claim its components. Alternatively, consider a scenario where the Orks can't crack the Dreadnought open, but decide to build around it. This is peak Ork ingenuity. If you can't take something apart, add more stuff to it until it becomes what you want. They begin welding additional armor plates to the Dreadnought's chassis, not because it needs them, but because more armor is always better. They attach extra weapons, creating mounting points for Ork guns and melee implements bolted directly to the ancient Imperial war machine. The result is a horrifying hybrid, a Dreadnought chassis covered in Orkish modifications, festooned with extra weapons, painted in garish clan colors, covered in glyphs and totems that would make any tech priest weep. The warrior inside is initially horrified by the desecration of his sacred form, but gradually comes to appreciate the practical benefits. The additional weapons, while crude, do provide extra firepower. The Ork armor, while ugly, does offer some protection against weapons that specifically target his original plating's weak points. This transformation into a looted Dreadnought creates a walking symbol of the bizarre relationship between Imperial technology and Ork ingenuity. The Dreadnought fights with Ork weapons alongside Imperial systems, his chassis bearing both the sacred symbols of his chapter and the crude glyphs of his Ork allies. He becomes something unique in the galaxy, a bridge between two species that should be mortal enemies. Another possibility involves the Dreadnought's pilot making an even more radical decision. After thousands of years of half-life, after accepting that his chapter is gone and the Imperium has moved on without him, what if he decides that strict adherence to Imperial doctrine is less important than achieving his mission objective? What if he concludes that working with Orks, truly working with them rather than just using them, is tactically justified? This would be heresy by any standard Imperial interpretation. But the warrior has already accepted that he's operating outside normal parameters. If temporary alliance with greenskins allows him to eliminate a larger threat to Imperial space, if it serves the greater strategic goal of protecting humanity, can it be justified? The philosophical question becomes practical when the Dreadnought begins actually coordinating with Ork forces. He shares tactical information translated through crude devices. He helps plan raids, combining his strategic expertise with Ork enthusiasm for combat. He trains Ork nobs in basic Imperial tactics, teaching them concepts like flanking maneuvers and fire discipline, concepts that most greenskins never consider. The Orks, for their part, learn that this Humie in the metal box knows things worth knowing. His suggestions lead to victories. His tactics save Ork lives while maximizing enemy casualties. His knowledge of Imperial defensive positions and strategies makes him invaluable when planning attacks on Imperial targets, a fact that the warrior grapples with constantly. Or consider a darker possibility. What if the extended exposure to Ork psychic fields begins affecting the Dreadnought itself? The greenskin Gestalt consciousness is powerful, and the warrior has been exposed to it constantly for weeks or months. His mechanical systems start exhibiting behaviors that shouldn't be possible, minor influences from the Ork belief that things just work if you believe hard enough. His weapons become slightly more reliable than they should be, given their age and lack of proper maintenance. His armor seems to turn aside blows that should have penetrated. His systems compensate for damage in ways that Imperial engineering alone can't explain. The warrior realizes, with growing horror, that the Dreadnought is being changed by proximity to the greenskins, influenced by their reality-warping field. This creates an existential crisis. Is he becoming Ork-touched? Is the sacred technology of his dreadnought being corrupted? Or is this simply a manifestation of the machine spirit, adapting to circumstances, using whatever resources are available to maintain combat effectiveness? The line between corruption and adaptation blurs uncomfortably. Yet another alternative involves the Orks deciding that if they can't control the dreadnought directly, they can at least point it at their enemies. They create a kind of Ork handler system, where specially designated mobs are responsible for getting the dreadnought into position for battles, providing it with targets, and making sure it's facing the right direction when it starts shooting. The dreadnought becomes less an ally and more a very dangerous force of nature that the Orks have learned to somewhat predictably redirect. They don't trust it, it doesn't trust them, but they've developed a working relationship based on mutual understanding of what each party brings to the arrangement. The Orks provide targets and logistical support. The dreadnought provides overwhelming firepower and combat effectiveness. This arrangement could last for years, with the dreadnought fighting alongside Orks in hundreds of battles, while never quite being on their side. He eliminates threats to the Ork clan because those threats are also obstacles to his own objectives. He accepts Ork support because the alternative is running out of ammunition or power. It's a cold, calculated relationship built on tactical necessity rather than any kind of genuine alliance. Perhaps the strangest possibility involves the dreadnought becoming a legend among the greenskins. The story of the Umi Wat fights good spreads through Ork culture, growing more elaborate with each telling. Some mobs seek him out specifically, wanting to fight alongside the legendary metal warrior. Others hunt him, seeking to be the ones who finally bring down something so famous. The warrior becomes a wandering champion, moving between Ork warbands, fighting in their battles, but never quite belonging to any of them. He's respected, feared, sought after, and hunted, sometimes all simultaneously. Ork mech boys study his design from a distance, trying to replicate his capabilities. Ork nobs measure their status partly by whether they've fought alongside or against the legendary dreadnought. In this scenario, the dreadnought transcends his original identity. He's no longer just a warrior of the angels resplendent, because that chapter is long gone. He's no longer purely imperial, because he fights alongside Xenos more often than against them. He becomes something unique, a symbol of war itself, a legend that belongs to neither humanity nor greenskins, but exists in the space between them. All of these alternatives share a common theme. They require both the Orks and the dreadnought's pilot to think outside the traditional frameworks of their respective species. They require flexibility, adaptation, and a willingness to accept arrangements that would normally be unthinkable. Whether such flexibility is realistic depends on the specific individuals involved, the circumstances they face, and how desperate they are to achieve their objectives. Conclusion, aftermath, and implications. When Orks find a dreadnought that's been asleep for nearly 7,000 years, the outcome depends entirely on the specific circumstances, the individuals involved, and the choices they make in the crucial moments following discovery. But regardless of which specific path events take, the encounter creates ripples that extend far beyond the immediate interaction. For the Orks, the experience of encountering Imperial technology, this sophisticated changes their understanding of what's possible. Even if they can't replicate a dreadnought's capabilities, they've seen what true Imperial engineering can achieve. Mech boys who studied the ancient war machine, even from a distance, carry that knowledge with them. They attempt to incorporate principles they observed into their own constructions. They aim for higher standards of quality, even if they can't quite articulate why or how to achieve them. The Ork mobs that interacted with the dreadnought, whether in combat or uneasy cooperation, spread stories throughout greenskin culture. These stories grow with each retelling, becoming legends that shape how Orks view Imperial technology and the warriors who pilot such machines. Future encounters with dreadnoughts might go differently because of these legends, with greenskins showing either more caution or more enthusiasm depending on how the original encounter ended. For the wider Imperium, the fate of this particular dreadnought could remain unknown for decades or even centuries. If the warrior inside eventually makes contact with Imperial forces, his debriefing would provide invaluable intelligence about Ork psychology, tactics, and technology. His experiences working alongside or fighting against greenskins, from a perspective no other Imperial servant has experienced, would inform future strategic planning. But there's also the possibility that his experiences, particularly if they included cooperation with Xenos, would be deemed heretical. The Inquisition might order his execution rather than allowing such dangerous ideas to spread. The fact that he survived for millennia, only to be destroyed by the Imperium he served, would be tragic, but entirely consistent with the grim-dark nature of the setting. For the warrior himself, the encounter with Orks represents a breaking point. He can't return to what he was. His chapter is gone, and the Imperium has moved on. He can't remain what he is. The situation demands adaptation beyond traditional dreadnought parameters. He must either evolve, finding new purpose and new methods of serving humanity, or he must embrace final destruction in a last stand worthy of his legacy. The broader implications touch on fundamental questions about identity, duty, and adaptation in Warhammer 40k. How much can something change before it stops being what it was? When circumstances make traditional doctrine impossible to follow, is it better to adapt or to die maintaining principles? Can enemies become allies when both face greater threats? Is cooperation with Xenos ever justified, even in the most extreme circumstances? These questions don't have easy answers, which is part of what makes the scenario compelling. Different readers, different players, different storytellers will reach different conclusions based on their interpretation of the setting's themes and their own philosophical positions. From a pure entertainment perspective, the idea of Orks finding an ancient dreadnought creates opportunities for stories that blend action, dark humor, and genuine philosophical exploration. The contrast between Ork enthusiasm and the dreadnought's grim dignity generates both comedy and tragedy. The tactical challenges of the situation provide exciting combat scenarios. The moral implications create character development opportunities rarely available in standard 40k narratives. Whether the dreadnought eventually becomes a legend among Orks, a cautionary tale for the Imperium, or simply another casualty in the endless grinding war that defines the setting, the encounter itself represents a unique moment where two very different species must navigate unprecedented circumstances. It's a reminder that even in a galaxy where there is only war, individuals still make choices that matter, that shape outcomes, that define who they are and what they stand for. The ancient warrior, awakening from millennia of darkness to find himself surrounded by enemies who view him as loot, faces decisions that will determine not just his fate, but potentially the course of events across an entire sector. The Orks, discovering technology beyond their usual understanding, must decide whether to destroy, claim, or cooperate with something they can't fully control. And somewhere in the intersection of these choices, new possibilities emerge. Not comfortable possibilities, not clean or simple, or morally straightforward possibilities, but possibilities that exist nowhere else in the setting, because nowhere else do you find an ancient imperial war machine and a horde of scavenging greenskins forced to interact on relatively equal terms. This is what happens when Orks find a dreadnought that's been asleep for 6,750 years. Chaos, violence, unexpected cooperation, tragedy, dark comedy, and ultimately a demonstration that even in the grim darkness of the far future, individuals can still surprise each other, adapt to impossible circumstances, and create outcomes that no strategic projection could have predicted. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Warhammer 40k's most interesting hypothetical scenarios, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Stories of Hammer for more explorations of the grimdark universe. What do you think would happen in this scenario? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but sometimes that war takes forms stranger than anyone expected.